On a fog-soaked morning in Seattle Ridge, the streets were silent, just drifting mist and the hum of heaters battling the cold dawn. But that quiet broke the moment a young woman in a bright red coat appeared, followed by 5 towering German Shepherd police dogs, marching in flawless formation beside her. Neighbors peeked from windows. No one understood why a 25-year-old wealthy heiress, known for glamour and privilege, walked a retired K-9 unit every morning at 7:00 a.m. sharp, or why the dogs scanned every corner like bodyguards sensing danger. Then, that morning, the lead dog, Bravo, stopped cold. A low growl rumbled from his chest, slicing through the mist. In that frozen second, a long-buried secret began to surface, one that would soon shock Seattle Ridge to its core. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Seattle Ridge woke beneath a cold, silver dawn, the kind where mist thickened in the streets like slow, wandering spirits, and the chill slipped under every doorframe. Even in early morning, the waterfront city carried a sharp edge, seagulls crying faintly above the harbor, neon signs flickering from coffee shops just opening, and the distant rumble of ferries cutting across the bay. Along Maple Avenue, a quiet, wealthy neighborhood tucked behind rows of Japanese maples and glass-front homes, the world was still half asleep when something unusual stirred the morning air. At precisely 7:00 a.m., as predictably as streetlights shutting off at sunrise, Olivia Carter stepped out from her townhouse. She was 25, strikingly beautiful in a way that made people turn twice. Tall, elegant posture, chestnut brown hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders, and a face framed by warm, hazel eyes that often carried a distant, guarded sadness. Her skin was smooth and porcelain-toned, contrasting sharply with the bright scarlet wool coat she wore every morning, a tailored designer piece that marked her unmistakably as someone rich, polished, and untouchable. Olivia moved with an effortless grace, the kind of confidence born not from arrogance but from upbringing, an heiress raised among marble floors, private chauffeurs, and silent dining rooms. And yet, she walked alone. That, however, was not what made the neighbors stare. Surrounding her were 5 German Shepherd police dogs, each one muscular, disciplined, and unmistakably trained. They walked in perfect formation, as though escorting a dignitary. One lead dog in front, 2 flanking her sides, 1 trailing behind, and 1 staying close enough for its tail to brush her coat. Their names were whispered around the neighborhood, though no one had confirmation. The lead dog was believed to be Bravo, a massive 7-year-old German Shepherd with thick black and tan fur, a powerful chest, and a calm but commanding gaze that lingered on everything. He bore a faint scar above his right eye, the kind that hinted at years of service, danger, and unspoken stories. On Olivia's right side was Rex, younger and leaner, with sharper features and restless amber eyes that scanned every car, window, and passerby. On her left walked Indy, heavier set, slower, older, her graying muzzle suggesting over a decade of work. Yet her movements remained protective and steady. Behind Olivia trailed Shadow, the darkest of the pack with sleek charcoal fur and a silence that felt almost eerie. And closest to her heel was Harper, the gentlest looking of the 5, with a soft gaze and 1 torn ear, an old injury from a past mission. Every dog wore a collar of heavy-duty black leather, but the tags hanging from them were strange, scratched, faded, and impossible to read from afar. The neighborhood had named her the Red Lady with the K9s, half in awe, half in unease, Parents stopped their children from getting too close. Elderly residents peeked through their blinds. Influencers filmed from balconies, whispering theories. But Olivia never looked toward them. She simply walked, calm, silent, composed, while her canines swept their eyes across driveways, alley entrances, and rooftops as if expecting danger around every corner. At the edge of the sidewalk, Sarah Whitmore, a tall, thin woman in her late 40s with a long face, frizzy blonde hair, and pale skin often flushed from gossiping excitement, held her phone high. Sarah was Maple Avenue's unofficial neighborhood reporter, a chatterbox who loved being the first to uncover anything out of the ordinary. She lived alone after a bitter divorce that had left her suspicious of everyone, and she had turned her energy toward online rumor groups. "There she goes," Sarah whispered into her live stream. Her light blue eyes narrowed. "Miss Redcoat and her police dogs. What is she hiding?" Across the street, George Hamilton, a retired bus driver in his 60s with a heavy build, tanned skin, and a snow-white beard, paused from sweeping his driveway. George was friendly, easygoing, and often offered free advice to anyone who would listen, but even he kept a respectful distance from Olivia's dogs. He watched the formation move past and muttered, "Those aren't pets. Those boys are working." As the small crowd of silent observers grew each morning, the only person who didn't stare was Ethan Ward, a newcomer who had rented a small apartment at the end of the block. Ethan was 32, tall, broad-shouldered, with rough stubble that darkened his jaw and a tired, world-worn look in his deep-set green eyes. A former Navy rescue diver turned freelance photographer, Ethan had seen more storms, literal and emotional, than most. A near-drowning accident during a mission years ago had left him with a slight limp and a quiet, introspective nature. The kind of man who noticed details others missed. Today, he leaned against his porch railing with a steaming mug of black coffee in hand, watching Olivia with an expression somewhere between curiosity and concern. As she passed, Bravo's eyes flicked toward him, sharp, assessing, almost warning. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply lowered his mug, gaze narrowing thoughtfully. That was when he noticed it, a glint of metal beneath Bravo's thick fur. As the big shepherd stepped into a beam of pale sunlight, Ethan's sharp eyes caught sight of the dog's collar and the tag dangling from it. Not just scratched, deliberately scraped, as if someone had tried to erase something. A badge number, a unit code, a past. His heartbeat thumped once, slow and heavy. Why would a wealthy young woman be walking 5 canine dogs whose identities had been wiped clean? The mist curled thicker around Maple Avenue, swallowing Olivia and her silent guardians as they turned the corner. Ethan's grip tightened on his mug. Something in his gut shifted, a stirring he hadn't felt since his last investigation years ago. "What are you hiding, Red Lady?" he murmured. And as the morning fog sealed her from view, Ethan Ward realized one thing with absolute certainty. This mystery was only just beginning. Seattle Ridge brightened slowly as the sun rose, melting the morning fog into thin wisps that drifted above the rooftops. But for Ethan Ward, the world felt heavier than yesterday. The image of Bravo's collar, its badge number scraped away, lodged itself in his mind like a thorn refusing to dislodge. Today he woke earlier, his broad shoulders tense, jaw shadowed with overnight stubble, and the old injury in his leg aching with the familiar dull throb that returned whenever he sensed something wrong. Ethan was not a man easily unsettled. His years as a Navy rescue diver had carved him into someone calm under pressure. But something about Olivia Carter and her erased identity K9s gnawed at him in ways he couldn't ignore. At 7 o'clock a.m. sharp, the click of Olivia's heels echoed down Maple Avenue. She looked nearly the same as the day before. Tall, elegant, her red coat glowing like flame in the pale sunlight. But there was a slight strain around her eyes today, a tightness in her lips that hadn't been there before. Her hazel eyes scanned the street quickly, as if confirming something, before she stepped into formation with her 5 towering German shepherds. Today, Bravo walked even closer to her side, shoulder brushing her coat, as though guarding her from invisible threats. Rex, restless as always, moved with a sharper tension, ears pricked at every sound. Indy lagged only slightly, but kept her old eyes fixed forward. Shadow, silent and alert, scanned rooftops, while Harper watched Olivia's every breath with gentle intensity. Ethan followed from a distance, careful and deliberate. He wasn't a stalker. He reminded himself of that. But something about her routine screamed danger, not vanity. This wasn't a woman taking her pets for a walk. This was a woman being escorted by a trained tactical unit. They moved deeper into the city, away from Maple Avenue's calm luxury, and toward a district where the buildings grew older, where cracked sidewalks ran alongside rows of abandoned shops, and an occasional lone fisherman cast a line into the gray-blue lake. After nearly 20 minutes of walking, Olivia turned down a narrow road lined with peeling fences and sagging rooftops, Lakeshore Lane, a neighborhood long forgotten by Seattle Ridge's wealth. At the end of the street stood an old lakeside house, its siding faded, the front door patched with mismatched wood panels and metal braces. The windows were clouded with dust, except for one small rectangle of glass wiped clean at eye level. The yard was overgrown, save for a worn path the dogs clearly knew well. Olivia opened the gate, its hinges screaming softly. The dogs entered first with practiced caution, their movements shifting from escort formation to search pattern. Bravo scanning left, Rex sniffing the perimeter, Shadow checking the porch shadow. Olivia stepped inside once they signaled it was safe. Ethan stayed hidden behind a leaning cedar tree across the road, his green eyes narrowed in concentration. He lifted his camera, an old battered model he trusted more than any new gadget, and zoomed toward the house. Through a crack in the curtains, he saw movement. More German shepherds, at least 3. One was old with a silver muzzle lying on a blanket. Another limped past Olivia, tail wagging weakly. A younger, golden-toned shepherd peeked from behind a stack of crates. "There are more," Ethan whispered. Inside, the dim light revealed a wall covered in K9 medals, faded certificates, and an array of framed photographs. Olivia stood beneath them, her posture softening, her breath unsteady. She reached toward a section of frames, each covered in dust except one. The clean frame held a photograph of a tall man in uniform, handsome, mid-40s, with strong features and deep-set eyes similar to Olivia's. He stood proudly among a team of K9 officers, his arm resting on Bravo when he was young. Ethan studied the man's face from afar. A stern jawline, broad shoulders, a warm but weary smile of someone who had given his life to duty. Olivia placed her hand gently on the frame and whispered, her voice trembling, "I'll keep your promise, Dad. I swear I will." The dogs gathered around her, nudging her hands, comforting her with their presence. She knelt among them, burying her fingers into their fur. Ethan felt something twist inside his chest, an old ache of grief, familiar and unwelcome. He lowered his camera. This was no hobby, No eccentric heiress routine. This was loss, legacy, something sacred, and then something new. A faint metallic clink echoed near Ethan's boot. He looked down. A police badge lay half buried in the wet soil. Its silver surface was dulled, but the engraving was still clear enough for him to read the name. Captain Marcus Carter, K-9 Unit. Carter. The same last name. Ethan's pulse jumped. He looked back toward the old house, toward the red coat barely visible inside. Suddenly, the pieces began to align like a puzzle he had never meant to solve. But before he could process it fully, a cold shiver crawled up his spine. Because next to the badge, etched into the metal, were deep scratches, like someone had tried to destroy it. Someone who didn't want this badge, or its owner's legacy, to ever be found. Ethan closed his hand around the metal, breath unsteady. The morning air felt suddenly sharper, more dangerous. "What happened to your father, Olivia?" he murmured. And for the first time he wondered if the danger circling her wasn't in the past, but closing in now. Ethan Ward returned to Lakeshore Lane the next afternoon, the badge of Captain Marcus Carter still weighing heavily in his pocket. The day was brighter than the one before, sunlight stretching across the lake and glittering on its rippling surface. Yet even in the warm glow, a quiet heaviness clung to the old lakeside house. Olivia Carter stepped out from the doorway as the dogs shifted aside to allow her through. She wore her red coat as always, tailored, striking, unmistakably expensive. But in the daylight, Ethan noticed the faint exhaustion beneath her polished appearance. Her hazel eyes seemed deeper today, shadows pooling beneath them like the residue of sleepless worry. When she saw him, she hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to anyone approaching her. Ethan raised his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture of peace. "I just wanted to talk," he said. His voice was calm, steady, edged with the gentleness he used to speak to victims on rescue missions long ago. Olivia studied him for several seconds, analyzing, measuring, deciding whether he was threat or harmless curiosity. Bravo stood beside her with rigid shoulders, his thick fur bristling as he watched Ethan with fierce, golden eyes. "I know you've been following me," she said softly. Her voice wasn't angry, only tired. "Most people film us or gossip, but you watch differently." Ethan met her gaze. "I found something yesterday near your fence." He held out the badge. Captain Marcus Carter. Olivia inhaled sharply. For a moment, the poised heiress vanished, and in her place was a daughter trying not to break. She reached out slowly, fingertips trembling as they closed around the metal. "This belonged to my father," she whispered. Bravo pressed his head against her leg, sensing her shift in emotion. She steadied herself, smoothing her coat, and gestured for Ethan to follow her inside. The interior was warm and worn, lit by soft lamps and filled with the distant sounds of resting dogs. Several German shepherds watched Ethan with cautious eyes. None barked, but their presence made him acutely aware that one wrong move would be a mistake. Olivia walked toward the table beneath the wall of photos. "My father," she began, touching the freshly cleaned frame, "was Captain Marcus Carter, leader of Seattle's K-9 tactical unit. He trained some of the finest police dogs in the state." She paused, her expression tightening. "He died during a hostage rescue 3 years ago. Most of the officers survived that night, but his entire K-9 team was scattered, retired, reassigned, or sent to different districts. They were supposed to be safe. Ethan listened, his posture still but attentive. He had seen people lose loved ones in the line of duty. He recognized the fracture in her voice, the lingering ache of unfinished grief. Olivia continued, voice steadier now. At first, I tried to move on. I ran my company, attended galas, smiled for photos, but none of it felt real anymore. A faint smile curved her lips, bitter at the edges. People think being wealthy makes you invincible. It doesn't. It just makes you lonely in better clothes. She took a breath, then turned toward the dogs lying nearby. Then one morning, Bravo showed up at this house. He was injured, limping, ribs showing, and he came straight to my gate, as if he had followed a map only he could see. She knelt beside the big shepherd, running her hand through his fur. Bravo leaned into the touch, releasing a low, comforting rumble. A week later, Indy arrived, Olivia said. Then Harper, then Shadow. One by one, every dog my father trained found their way back here, no matter where they had been sent. Ethan frowned slightly. They all came back to you? Yes. I didn't understand it either at first, she admitted. I thought it was coincidence, or maybe they were running from bad units. But then I realized they weren't running. She lifted her chin slightly. They were coming home. The word hung between them like a secret finally spoken aloud. Olivia looked directly into Ethan's eyes. They came searching for the last person who still carried my father's scent, his voice, his presence. She placed a hand over her chest. Me. Ethan exhaled slowly. It made sense. The loyalty of police dogs was legendary, their bond with handlers nearly unbreakable, and Captain Carter had clearly meant everything to them. So you've been taking care of them, Ethan said. All of them. Olivia nodded. Feeding them, healing them, training them again. They trust me, and I trust them. She smiled faintly, but with pride. Out there, people call me the Red Lady with the K9s. They think I'm eccentric. You're not eccentric, Ethan said quietly. You're honoring your father. Her eyes softened. Exactly. For a moment, the room felt warm, peaceful, but peace never lasted long in Olivia's world. A sudden vibration broke the stillness, the sharp buzz of her phone. Olivia walked toward the small kitchen counter and picked it up. As she checked the screen, her face drained of color. Ethan stepped closer. What is it? Without a word, she turned the phone toward him. The video feed from her security camera showed the front gate of the old house. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark hoodie. His face was mostly hidden, but thick facial stubble shadowed his jaw. In his right hand, glinting under the porch light, was a tranquilizer gun aimed directly at the gate. And he wasn't just standing. He was waiting. Patient, experienced, unmoving, like a hunter observing prey. Olivia's breath caught. He's watching my dogs. Ethan leaned in, eyes narrowing in cold recognition. That's not a random stranger. That's a professional. The feed flickered as the man stepped closer to the camera, and the chapter ended with Olivia's whisper, breaking through the silence. Someone has come for them. Seattle Ridge shifted under an unsettling tension the next morning, as if the entire city sensed the invisible danger pressing in. A cold front swept down from Pine Hill, turning the air brittle and sharp. The lake glimmered beneath the pale noon sun, deceptively calm, while the wind carried a metallic bite that made leaves rattle like warnings against the fences of Lakeshore Lane. The German shepherds felt it first. Bravo, usually composed and steady, had become rigid and hyper-alert. His ears stayed pinned forward, his massive frame always positioned between Olivia and any open space. The faintest whisper of movement made his fur rise like a storm ready to break. Rex paced with restless energy, tail stiff, sharp amber eyes cutting toward the street corners. Indy, even with her age, scanned shadows with a veteran's instinct, while Shadow and Harper formed a quiet flank around Olivia. Silent, unreadable, ready. Olivia Carter tried to hide her worry behind her polished grace, but anxiety tugged at her every move. Her red coat swayed behind her as she checked the house's perimeter for the second time that day, eyes flicking anxiously toward Pine Hill's darkening silhouette. The memory of the man in the security camera, broad-shouldered, hooded, tranquilizer gun gleaming, still lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. Ethan Ward, who had spent the early morning gathering information, returned with a grim expression. He strode up the cracked pathway, his tall frame taut with tension. His green eyes held a storm of their own, and the lines along his jaw were sharper than yesterday, a sign he hadn't slept enough or at all. Olivia faced him with a mix of dread and unspoken hope. "Did you find anything?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "I talked to someone I used to know, a former federal wildlife investigator, Julian Cross." He paused. "He's been tracking an organization for years. They specialize in acquiring rare or trained animals for illegal sale. High profit, low morality." Olivia felt a chill crawl down her spine. "And they're looking for K9 dogs?" "Not just any K9 dogs," Ethan said quietly. "Dogs that were decommissioned but never reported dead. Dogs who vanished off the record." His gaze sharpened. "Dogs like yours." Olivia's breath caught. Bravo stepped closer to her leg, sensing her distress. Ethan continued. "Julian said the group operates out of Pine Hill. Remote terrain, abandoned warehouses, no police presence. Perfect for harvesting animals." The word harvesting twisted Olivia's stomach. "Why would they want my father's dogs specifically?" Ethan shook his head. "Because they're elite, highly trained, loyal, and valuable on the black market. They can be used for private security, illegal fighting circuits, or—" "Stop!" Olivia whispered. She couldn't bear hearing the rest. Bravo pressed himself against her thigh, offering strength. Harper whined softly. The sun dipped lower. Olivia spent the evening in the backyard, checking each enclosure, each dog bed, and every latch on the gates. This time, she wasn't just a caretaker. She was a guardian in her own right, fear braided tightly with determination. The backyard was dimly lit by a row of small solar lamps. Beyond the fence, Pine Hill loomed like a darker shadow against the sky. One of the lamps flickered, just for a second. A nearly imperceptible disturbance. Bravo noticed instantly. His ears shot up. His body stiffened. A low, rolling growl built deep in his chest. One Olivia had never heard from him unless danger was undeniable. "Bravo?" she whispered. But he didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the farthest corner of the yard. The wind stilled. Then, clang. A harsh metallic sound sliced through the night. Something or someone had made contact with the fence. Olivia's heart leapt violently. She grabbed the flashlight from the workbench, sprinted toward the noise with Bravo and Shadow lunging forward beside her, the others thundering behind. Her boots skidded on the cold earth as she reached the fence. The beam of her flashlight jerked wildly, catching nothing but bushes, until a roar of an engine erupted from behind the property. A black truck, large and heavy-duty, with matte paint and no license plates, accelerated up the gravel road behind the house. The rear door hung open, metal edges dented as if slammed shut in a rush. Olivia's scream tore through the cold air. "No! No, no! Bravo! Count them!" But Bravo was already frantic, pacing, nose digging into the ground where the scent trail abruptly ended. Olivia turned to the remaining dogs. Rex, Indy, Shadow, Harper. Her gaze swept across the yard again, desperation rising like a tide. "Where's the fifth? Where is he?" Harper barked sharply, confirming her worst fear. One of her father's dogs, one who trusted her, who had found his way home, was gone, stolen. Olivia stumbled forward, gripping the fence, her breath coming fast and shallow. The truck disappeared into the darkened path that led up Pine Hill, its taillights fading like fading signals of doom. In the silence that followed, Olivia felt the full weight of what this meant. The hunters weren't watching anymore. They were taking. And they had just taken one of hers. The night deepened around Seattle Ridge, heavy with the scent of pine and cold metal, as Olivia Carter stood trembling beside the broken fence where one of her father's K9s had been taken. Bravo paced relentlessly, his thick fur bristling with the urgency of a creature who understood loss far too well. Rex stalked the perimeter with his amber eyes blazing, while Shadow and Harper hovered close to Olivia, sensing the fracture in her composure. The red coat she wore, normally a symbol of confidence, clung to her in the wind like a wounded banner. Ethan Ward arrived moments later, having sprinted up the hill with breathless determination. His face, roughened by stubble and carved with lines of nights spent worrying more than sleeping, hardened into something fiercely protective when he saw Olivia's expression. "We're not losing him," Ethan said, his voice gravelly but steady. "Not tonight." Bravo immediately pressed his muzzle to the ground and inhaled deeply, his powerful chest expanding as he locked onto a scent trail with surgical precision. The others formed behind him like a tactical team preparing for deployment. Olivia's heartbeat quickened. These dogs weren't just trained. They were united in purpose. Ethan called the police, and a brief but intense conversation followed. The department connected him to Captain Henry Dalton, the current head of Seattle Ridge Policing. Dalton was a man in his mid-50s, with iron gray hair, stern blue eyes, and a thick build that came from decades on the job. His voice carried the low rumble of authority, the kind that could silence a chaotic room. Though his face rarely betrayed emotion, he had once served under Olivia's father and carried a quiet reverence for the late Captain Carter. "Send me the coordinates when you have them," Dalton said. "We'll be right behind you." Within minutes, police cruisers sped down Pine Hill, lights off to avoid detection, while Olivia, Ethan, and the remaining 4 K9s pushed into the forested outskirts near the abandoned industrial zone. Bravo led with unwavering conviction, following the trail up a slope thick with fallen branches and wet pine needles. The darkness around them felt predatory, the kind that fed on fear, but Olivia kept her chin up as she ran, the dogs shifting around her like living armor. Ethan stayed close, guiding her over rocks and roots, his protective instincts sharpened by every shadow that flickered across Bravo's line of sight. After nearly half an hour of climbing, Bravo suddenly halted. His ears sharpened. A low growl churned inside his chest. Ahead, through breaks in the trees, an old warehouse loomed, its rusted metal sides glowing faintly under a halogen lamp. A large black truck was parked outside, the same model Olivia had seen speeding away. "We found them," Ethan whispered. Olivia's heart nearly cracked. They crept closer, staying low behind stacks of discarded pallets and broken crates. Through the gaps, Olivia saw them. Steel cages, dozens of them all, lining the warehouse interior. The stench of fear and unwashed fur wafted through the air. German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and other trained police dogs lay inside, some barking weakly, some too exhausted to lift their heads. And then she saw him, her missing canine curled in the farthest cage, whining with a hoarse, heartbreaking sound. "He's alive," she whispered. "He's alive, Ethan." Before Ethan could stop her, Bravo moved. His body lowered to the ground, muscles coiled. A deep growl rose through the silent warehouse. Instantly, 3 men inside snapped their heads toward the sound. One of them, tall, lean, with oily blonde hair and twitching, nervous hands, lifted a tranquilizer rifle. Another, broader, with a crooked nose and scarred cheek, reached for a metal pipe. The last one, clearly the leader, stood coolly in a black tactical jacket. He was a severe-looking man in his 40s, with dark hair streaked with gray, sharp, angular features, and cold, slate eyes. Eyes that held no remorse. His name, as Olivia would later learn, was Victor Hale, a former private security contractor with a reputation for brutality. "We've got company," Hale said. "Get ready." But before any of them could react further, Bravo lunged. Indy followed, with Shadow and Rex flanking from the sides. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Clattering metal, shouted curses, dogs barking with fierce determination. Bravo slammed into the man with the tranquilizer gun, knocking him backward. Rex darted toward the crooked-nosed man, teeth bared but controlled, forcing him back and disarming him with precision. Indy and Shadow hemmed Hale in, their growls vibrating through the metal floors. Harper guarded Olivia, refusing to let her step into danger. Then, sirens. Police cruisers burst into the clearing, Captain Dalton at the front. His presence, stern and imposing, froze the criminals where they stood. Officers swarmed the warehouse, weapons drawn but controlled, moving carefully around the K9s as they apprehended Hale's men. "Stand down," Dalton barked. "Hands where I can see them." Within minutes, the operation was dismantled. The cages were unlocked one by one, and exhausted dogs stumbled free, tails wagging weakly as they were carried into waiting vans for treatment. Olivia rushed to her missing canine, tears streaming as she embraced him. The dog pressed his muzzle to her cheek, whining with relief. Bravo nudged them both, his dark eyes softening. Dawn broke slowly over Pine Hill as the last officers processed the scene. The sunlight struck Olivia's red coat, making it glow like a banner in the pale morning. Captain Dalton approached her with a solemn expression. In his hand was a polished medal engraved with her father's name. "Your father would be proud," Dalton said, pinning it gently onto her coat. "You've kept his legacy alive." Olivia's voice cracked as she whispered, "He taught me how to love them, but they taught me how to be strong." Months later, the old lakeside house stood transformed. New windows, fresh paint, open gates. Inside, Olivia had built a sanctuary, a rehabilitation center for retired and injured police dogs. Sunlight poured through wide skylights, illuminating hallways filled with wagging tails and hopeful eyes. Laughter echoed again, warmth returned, and Olivia Carter was no longer alone. Bravo sat beside her on the front porch, watching Seattle Ridge shimmer beneath the rising sun. the city where she had turned loss into legacy, where broken hearts had found their way home, and where the last promise of Captain Marcus Carter lived on in every loyal heartbeat around her. In the quiet glow of that Seattle morning, as Olivia stood among the rescued K-9s and the first rays of sunrise washed over Pine Hill, it felt as though something far greater than courage had guided their steps. Some might call it fate, others might call it luck. But those who believe know it was something more. Because sometimes, in the darkest hours, when fear tightens around the heart and hope feels impossibly small, God sends help in the form of loyal companions, unexpected allies, and the strength we didn't know we carried. And sometimes, He sends it through the steady heartbeat of a German shepherd who refuses to give up. Life rarely gives us easy roads. Each of us faces losses, burdens, and nights that seem too long. But like Olivia, we can rise again, guided by faith, by love, and by the quiet miracles God places in our path. Miracles that look like second chances, new beginnings, or a loyal dog who comes home. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs a reminder that they're not alone. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and tell us how God has touched your life, whether through a person, a pet, or a moment of grace you'll never forget. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and surround your home with His peace. And may every step you take this week be guided by His gentle, steady hand, just as He guided Olivia and her faithful K-9s. God bless you, and thank you for watching.